Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for part two in our AI for You series. Today, we're going to discuss how you can get your organization in the groove. My name is Nicola Bolton, and I am a consultant in advisory services with The Groove. And with me today is Tanya.
Hi, everyone. Tanya Gray. I am also with Advisory Services with The Groove. Excited to be chatting with y'all today.
We have a great agenda prepared for you all today. Now, Tanya's going to kick us off with a recap of the AI readiness assessment that we did in part one of our webinar series. Now, if you weren't able to make it, that's okay. Chelsea, if you wouldn't mind popping a link to the recording in the chat, you all can watch that as your leisure. Next, we're going to dive into preparing your processes and your people to take on an AI initiative. Then we're going to wrap up with how the Groove can assist you with this. And we are going to reserve some time at the end for questions. But if, as we're talking, if something comes up and you have a question that comes to mind, please feel free to type that into the Q&A section, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. All right, now, Tanya, why don't you kick us off?
Awesome. So our first session was titled AI for You, Truths, Tools, and Tactics, and we focused on defining AI, demystifying myths and misconceptions, and discussing Workday AI features by SKU within the overall Workday Illuminate roadmap. So if you missed that session, during the session, we invited our participants to take a short assessment to really gauge how prepared their organization is for AI initiatives. And so we're going to start by showing you some of those results so you can see how participants responded, as well as gauge really where your organization is at in terms of overall readiness for AI. So the assessment was broken out into three different areas of measurement, the first being strategy and planning, which we'll be touching on during today's session. We'll talk about how to identify areas within your organization to introduce AI. And you can see here many of our initial respondents are starting with HCM only, followed by non-Workday applications. We were also really pleased to see that the majority of our respondents have identified benefits of AI that align with their overall strategic plan, which really should be a crucial first step in any AI journey. Later in the session, we'll talk about executive buy-in and sponsorship of AI initiatives, really being able to show and articulate how the effort fits into the overall strategy of your business, which of course is key. The second area of measurement in the assessment is organizational readiness, which you can probably imagine by the title of the session is where we're going to focus our time today. So how do we ensure your organization is ready to fully adopt your next AI initiative? So using these results as a baseline for today's discussion, many of you are somewhere in the middle when it comes to overall awareness and desire around the need to leverage AI. This is no shock since, as we discussed in the first session, AI is all the buzz, right? We're hearing about it everywhere. There's no shortage of messaging out there about the need to start utilizing AI. The question really is in the where and how to utilize it. So with that being said, 56% of respondents said that there's still some concern about potential job loss as a result of AI. So again, we'll talk more about potential ways to combat this later in today's chat. And the last piece here is around current change management capacity and successful prior change programs, which somewhat even between active and successful and unsuccessful, which given our experience is not a huge shock. Okay. The last area of measurement in the short survey was around process optimization. So across the board, majority of respondents are starting to assess, starting to identify where AI can be leveraged to drive efficiencies, and are just starting to establish benchmarks and define KPIs. So we'll end today's session by discussing the importance of establishing these benchmarks and KPIs to really show after an AI implementation, increase in productivity, decrease in processing time, or any other efficiencies that were gained by the new technology. Right. So that was just a quick recap. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole. We're going to start our discussion around key preparation areas within your organization to identify where, what, and how to start with an AI initiative.
Perfect. Thanks, Tanya. As Saint-Exupéry famously said, a goal without a plan is just a wish. So let's take a look at how we can turn your wish of bringing AI into your organization into an actual goal. The first step in this is really preparing your processes for AI. And to do this, we need to identify where we're going to implement. To do this, we need to define what we're actually attempting to solve. So, are there any current pain points that we would like to address? This will really help us identify areas in which implementing AI could actually potentially help our organization. Then from there, we can define benchmarks or KPIs. So I want to take a pause here. I'd love to hear from our participants in the chat. Are there any areas in your daily work life that you would just love to either outsource to AI, to automate, or have some AI assist you with? I'll give you a minute there while people are entering that into the chat. Tanya, I'm curious, is there an area within our organization that you'd like to see add some AI features to?
Ooh, that's a great question. Couple areas come to mind. The first being within recruiting. So
Mm.
a lot of time is spent on job descriptions. I don't know if any others feel the same, but I would love to see AI help craft even just a starting point job description that we can then build upon, utilizing maybe existing JDs that are already out there, utilizing skills, relevant information from the job profile. I feel like there has to be a way where we can utilize that data and information to start a new job description rather than start every job description from scratch.
Ooh, that's a great one. What else?
Um, the other one that comes to mind is expenses. So expense reports are sometimes the bane of my existence.
Yeah, yeah.
As a consulting agency, we travel, we incur expenses, and we always have to, of course, create expense reports. I am constantly saving receipts, losing receipts, misplacing receipts, and then taking said receipts and having to manually input the expense item, the date, the dollar amount, sometimes the merchant if needed. And I just think there has to be a better way. There has to be a
Yeah.
way that AI could help us to parse receipt data into expense lines.
Speaking of receipts, I see we're getting some reactions to that. Um, I one time actually went to a conference and no joke, the ink on my receipt melted before I got back to back home to my office, and I had to submit a missing receipt form, and I was so mad. I was like, no, I have the receipt. It's right here. It's just not usable. So yeah, something like that would be really great to have. And it sounds like from those reactions we're getting, a lot of you probably agree with us. So let's use expenses as a use case for today. Um, let's see, as Tanya mentioned, there's so many issues with receipts, and then it takes a lot of time for you to submit it, and then there's delays in getting reimbursed. There's a lot of reasons why expenses can be kind of cumbersome, but it's not just on those of us who are actually submitting the expense report. There's an entire team that is behind the scenes reconciling the reports, auditing the reports, and there's just a lot of manual data entry that's pretty time consuming and error prone. So now that we have our problem identified, what are we actually going to do about this? First, you can take a look at what you already have access to. Do you already have a tool that does have some AI capabilities that just need to be activated or enabled? If you don't, do you have a tool identified that your organization would benefit from investing in? So, keeping with the theme of expenses, we have two possible solutions, and these are specific to Workday. The first one is receipt scanning, and this is a huge time saver and can really help reduce errors. When you use your phone or an iPad to take pictures of a receipt, Workday will go in and, like Tanya said, will analyze it. It'll quickly populate some of those areas that are kind of time consuming to go in and manually add, like the amount, currency, date, and a merchant, and they'll populate that onto a quick expense. Also, after Workday has scanned approximately 3,000 receipts, it can actually start to either default in or recommend some expense items based upon the analysis of that particular receipt. So this will really allows employees to immediately expense an item, and they can do this as soon as it's incurred.
This would be amazing.
I know it would. Just think, no more lost receipts. How much of a game changer would that be?
Huge.
Another possible solution is Expense Protect, and this will automatically review expense reports for unusual activity as soon as those reports are submitted. Once the expense report is submitted, Expense Protect will then go in, identify amount outliers, any misclassified expense items, or even duplicate expenses. So this means that if an expense item is usually entered for about $5, but this time it's submitted for $50, it's going to get flagged for review before it goes through the approval process. Or if you code flights as, let's say, lodging, this is also going to get flagged. Then each expense line and report will get flagged with either a high, medium, or low risk indicator, and this will help streamline your internal review and audit process. And just a note here that this is absolutely not replacing a person. It's just really going to help the teams identify potential problem areas, and it's still going to need some human intervention and review from an actual physical set of eyes. All right, we have identified a problem. We have identified a solution. Now, how do we actually get there? How do we turn this on? What is the technical way that we actually make this happen? Um, First, one of the great ways to go about doing this is to identify the project team. Once you have your project team identified, are they going to need specialized training or certification? So, Tanya, in your experience, what do you think would be a good project team to coordinate and build for an initiative like this?
Yeah, great question. I would say in this type of scenario, I would make sure you have a mix of functional individuals as well as those within the business. So in the case of expenses, I would say you want potentially an expense administrator or an expense partner, somebody who works within your T&E or your travel expenses and purchasing teams, as well as somebody from, outside or more within the business that's really incurring expenses, completing expense reports, often maybe like an operations manager. And the reason for that is, I think it helps to have that step back and really understand
Mhm.
what that process looks like from the business side, what current state looks like, so you can really identify what those impacts are and what that change is. And speaking of change, of course, we always recommend that you have somebody from change management on your project team as well.
Oh, of course, we can't forget about change management. That's very important. So once you have your project team assembled, what's the budget? What is the timeline? How quickly or how slowly are we trying to do this? We also need to take a look at testing. So who is going to participate in testing, and what are these testing scenarios going to be? In addition to that, when we're actually going through this testing, what is the success criteria and the expected results of each of our scenarios? We need to be able to validate that the data coming in is accurate and is correct, and that it's also from a trusted source. If our data is not clean, it's not accurate, then the results just aren't going to be valid. Then we need to identify, do we want to pilot this with a small group first, or are we going to go big bang and go to the entire organization? A note on this, we always recommend, when possible, starting with a smaller group pilot to really flesh out any potential details or problems that might come up. And finally, you need to really take a good look at, is this something we can actually do right now? Maybe you have a different large technology implementation, or maybe even a cultural initiative underway, and starting an additional implementation or initiative running those two concurrently would detract from the success of both. In that situation, we would recommend definitely wait until the first implementation is completed before you take on this AI project. And this will just make sure that we can cement in the higher adoption, user adoption rates for both of these initiatives. So we have talked about identifying the problem. We've talked about what to do about the problem and how to go about implementing it. Tell me, Tanya, what's next?
The people, of course. I bet no one saw that one coming. This is a section we could spend hours on, as there's so many facets to a strong people-centered change program when adopting new technology. But since, of course, we only have a short time, I'm going to hone in on just three key areas for today. So the first being ensuring executive alignment. So this is paramount to really any change initiative. Does your leadership know why we're embarking on this new technology and how it will align with overall strategic goals and objectives? Nicole will talk again in a few moments about a strategy map, which is a really great way to help leadership align to overall organizational goals, really understand the guiding principles and overall success metrics for the project. Do you have a sponsor for the project? And I would say more importantly, do they understand their role as a sponsor? In my experience with change projects, it's fairly easy to get a leader to raise their hand to sponsor a project. It's actually more difficult to educate that sponsor, to really make sure that sponsor understands what their role means and what we really need them to do. We need our sponsors to be active and visible throughout the project. So not just attend the kickoff, but really checking in on the project team, checking in on how the change initiatives are going and how the people are doing throughout, from start to finish of the project. They need to be able to help us relay messaging, right? Especially in instances like our third item here. Are there company policies that this initiative will impact? So executive alignment is crucial if and when we've got policies that are changing. So if we continue to use the expenses example, maybe we are removing a level of approval, right? So maybe our expenses business process right now goes through multiple levels of approval. But because of this automation, because of quicker audit times and things like that, we are removing one of the levels of approval, for example. Or maybe instead of a 30-day deadline or a 45-day deadline to submit expenses, maybe we're reducing that to 30. Whatever it might be, if there are some big process or policy changes as a result of an AI initiative or any initiative, really, we really need to make sure that we have not only executive buy-in, but also that our messaging is really coming from a top-down approach. The second thing I wanted to really focus in on today is really honing in on the behavioral change required. We want to talk about what exactly is changing. So the first step, of course, in any kind of change impact analyses is to identify who it impacts. So in the case of our expenses example, we know that this will impact all employees who submit expenses in some form. You might be choosing to start with an initiative that impacts a smaller group of people or piloting just with a specific part of your workforce rather than rolling out large scale. But regardless, we need to make sure we identify exactly who is being impacted by the change. And then what is the change? What are we actually asking them to do differently? So let's be specific here. Again, it's not just, hey, AI is automating your expense report processing. But what are we asking them to do? We're asking them to potentially use their mobile device, take photos of their receipts, upload immediately after an expense is incurred so that Workday can use AI to create expense lines as they go rather than waiting until the end of the trip to create an expense report. Let's be really specific on what that change impact looks like. And then how do we anticipate the reactions? Hopefully, we anticipate more positive than negative. But regardless, we need to recognize and acknowledge upfront what those reactions could be. So, Nicole, what are some of the negative reactions we might receive as a result of the expenses initiative? We've talked a lot about the positive, but what negative impacts or negative reactions might we receive?
That's a really important question. Great one. So, I mean, overall, change can be really scary for people. I mean, we're change practitioners. We know this. But there are some people who are especially kind of wary of technology and oh my gosh, add in AI and they're like, no. So concerns about data privacy might be really top of mind for a lot of people. Additionally, there are a number of organizations in which employees don't necessarily have a work-sponsored mobile device, and they don't want to put the Workday application, like a work application, on their personal phone. So they may not really be willing to get on board with that aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are all great points. Um, what do you think we could do to mitigate any of those negative reactions or the risk
Mm.
associated with those?
So for the second one, did you guys know that there is a camera application on your laptop? I just found this out the other day. Maybe you all have known, but if you have a Windows computer, I'm sure probably Mac has this as well. But there's actually a camera application that you can record video and you can use it like a regular camera. So most of the time when people are traveling for work, they are going to be traveling with their laptop. So you can use that to take a picture of the receipt and upload it into Workday that day or that way. Additionally, I've seen actually a number of organizations that will have like a team mobile device, either maybe they might have some iPhones or some sort of mobile phone that will stay in a specific location that people can check out as they're going, or there might be a like a cart or a mobile workstation that people can use, some sort of shared device like that. But really, I'm going to say the number one thing that I have seen that will really make a difference when we're talking about easing people's fears and kind of that negative reaction, two things. Strong training plan and really good, strong, clear communications.
Yes, absolutely. Great segue, Nicole, into the last item I wanted to touch on. So, this may seem elementary, right? This may seem very basic. Of course, we need clear communication. However, one of the biggest reasons people resist change is fear, right? Lack of clarity or fear, especially when it comes to AI-based initiatives where there already may be fear or questions around job loss or job changes as a result. So, when we already know that fear exists, we need to make sure our messaging is clear and concise. So, on the left hand side, you see examples of what I would consider vague messaging. And this messaging is not bad, it's not wrong. And there are absolutely times in which we want to use these vague messages. So, maybe when we are talking about our overall AI roadmap, right? What's coming in the next 1, 3, or 5 years down the road? It is absolutely okay to say expense reporting will look different in the future, or AI will automate expense reporting. However, when we're in the midst of an initiative, getting ready to launch, we want to be clear and concise. We want to be able to say, hey, instead of creating your expense report post travel, upload receipts using your mobile device right as expenses are incurred. We want to be crystal clear. We want to let them know exactly what we're expecting of them, when we're expecting it, and then, of course, make sure they really understand when they can learn more information, when training and additional communication will occur, and who to reach out to for questions. Right? So, with that, I am going to turn it back over to Nicole to share about how we at the Groove can assist as you're preparing your organization for your next AI initiative.
All right, thanks, Tanya. So we outlined at a high level how to prepare your processes and your people. So let's talk about some actual ways in which the Groove does that. Tanya mentioned before how critical it is to identify your stakeholder groups that are impacted by whatever change you're initiating. So here on the screen, you see this is an example of a stakeholder map where we plot stakeholder groups as we anticipate their reaction to the change and the impact this change will have on that particular group. For instance, if we look into the top right corner, we see the finance admin and the AP specialist teams. So again, keeping with expenses, these are groups that will hopefully really benefit from this initiative. So we expect them to react positively to this change. And of course, it's going to have a high impact on these two teams. But then if we move a little bit lower down to the bottom into that middle area, we see some HR groups. Well, the HR specialists and the HR admins aren't necessarily going to submit very many expense reports, and they're not involved in the processing of expense reports or auditing or anything like that. So this doesn't really have a huge impact on these two teams, but I would hope they're not mad about this change coming, but they're probably also not going to be our cheerleaders or our champions for this. So we can use this early in the project to really anticipate where we might experience some resistance, and then we can also make plans to address that resistance. We can also use this to identify groups that might be our champions, or even maybe we can find a sponsor this way. Then we use this as an input to really drive our communications plan and our training plan. We're not going to train someone who never submits an expense report in the same way that we would train someone who's submitting an expense report on a weekly basis. We can also use this as a metric and determine, okay, did we anticipate the reactions and impacts correctly? Or will we need to do some remedial or additional support based upon what we have predicted? Another deliverable that we create is a strategy map, and this is the plan at the start of the project that includes the overarching goals, value statements, and success metrics or KPIs. So once we have determined that we are actually going to implement an AI initiative, this gives us a roadmap with guidance on where we're trying to go and why we're trying to get there. As Tanya mentioned, obtaining that executive alignment is really crucial to the success of any project, and the strategy map will lay everything out and ensure that we do have that executive alignment. In this example, I have circled or highlighted some success metrics, and from here we can use these to measure our KPIs. So for example, on average, how long does it take for someone to submit an expense report after a business expense has been incurred? And then how long does it actually take for expense reports to get approved? We capture what we do today, how long these processes take today, and then create targets of where we want to go, how we want to improve. Then, once we have implemented, we can determine if we're meeting our goals. We can also see, is AI helping us meet these goals or these targets? And if we're not there, if we're not meeting those goals and targets that we've set for ourselves, why not? What's the problem? Is there human behavior that needs to be addressed a little bit more beyond what we've already done, or is it something else? So let's take an example. For instance, let's say today you have about 40% of your expense reports that are being sent back for revisions, and you want to reduce that down to 20%. 3 months after you implement, you review and you see, okay, you've made some improvement, but you're only at 35%. Why hasn't this improved as much as you really want it to? So you do some digging, and turns out that data mappings were done last year. They're a little bit old, and they're not accurately matching your expenses in your categories. Or also we've seen this a number of times. Some hotels sometimes break out their different, like their taxes, their fees, differently. And while you may code that all under lodging, it's getting expense to different areas. So that could be throwing those off too. It's really critical to make sure that your data and your mapping are up to date and correct. Now, I will say this is a really complex topic, and I'd love to go deeper into this here, but unfortunately, we just don't have enough time today. So be sure to join our next session in the AI for You series, part 3, where that's going to be for data readiness and AI governance. Our colleagues are going to discuss all things data. Now, with that, Chelsea, what questions do we have?
Thank you. So we do have one question from Sharon. I see most of the metrics are around FTE savings. Do you have any success metrics around revenue, cost avoidance, or customer value?
Did you mean specifically on that screenshot that we shared before?
She can't respond live.
Oh, she can't
so-
respond. Okay.
Let's assume yes.
Okay. So that was just an example. We absolutely have a lot of metrics that we can that we can provide. We can take a look at that, and I think that's a great one, probably I think for follow up, so that we can make sure that we actually accurately answer that.
Yeah, and when we help you build out your strategy map, we'll talk about that at the very beginning. What are those success metrics we want to measure? Are they more around cost? Are they more around time savings? A combination of both, and we'll make sure that whatever we put in place on that strategy map really works specifically for you and your organization.
Perfect. Do we have any more questions? Feel free to submit them through the chat. One more did come through. Who should be involved in determining that the results of AI behaviors are correct?
Oh, that's a really good question. Tanya, do you want to take a stab at that or do you want me to?
I would say in the beginning, as we're building out the strategy map, let's build out a RACI, right? Let's define who
Yeah.
overall kind of responsible and accountable. We also want to have similar structures in place to confirm results using AI, train the algorithm to map the transactions so they post to the proper accounts, right? As we're, when we're thinking of that expenses example. I think this all kind of points back to data governance, which again, we'll talk about in the next
Absolutely.
section. What's the source of the data? What are those expected results? We want to make sure that we have the right people in place to really understand who's responsible and accountable so we can make sure those are mapped, correctly.
Perfect. Well, we are out of time, so thank you everyone who joined. Thank you, Nicole and Tanya, for presenting, and please join us for the next session, AI for You, Data Readiness and AI Governance. I will be sending a follow-up email with the link to this recording if you would like to watch it again, send it to colleagues, anything. But thanks again.